President Lee Jae Myung pledges to end the vicious cycle of unnecessary tensions with North Korea and proposes a pragmatic and phased solution to denuclearization of the regime's nuclear weapons program. Hello and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's September 24th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we touch upon the remarks shared by President Lee Jae Myung during his keynote speech at the 80th UN General Assembly and their broader implications. For more, I have Camille Ruiz with Radio France Internationale here in the studio. Camille, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Ruy Valdes with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Ruy, welcome back.
A pleasure to be here.
Camille, I believe we start with you today. Let's begin with the foreign media coverage of President Lee Jae Myung's presence and keynote speech at the UN General Assembly. What has been the general response?
Well, some of foreign media outlets have been paying close attention to President Lee Jae Myung's remarks at the UN General Assembly. For example, one of our colleagues at Bloomberg published a very detailed piece on his speech. First, international media underlined his will to reduce military tensions with North Korea as much as possible. Of course, anything related to inter-Korean relations always draws strong attention from abroad. His call at the UN Security Council to expand the number of non-permanent seats was also noticed. And finally, his comments on foreigners and Koreans living in South Korea stood out as well. He emphasizes the need to ensure that both national and foreigners can be respected as equal members of society in all fields of life in South Korea. And Bloomberg analyzed this as a clear contrast to Donald Trump's rhetoric on what he called uncontrolled migration.
Right, there was a bit of a comparison there. Ruy, the president's speech touched upon the South Korea's democratic resilience amid the short-lived martial law last December. Do you believe South Korea has since perhaps restored its diplomatic credibility?
Yes, well, I would say that allies and observers have mentioned that, yes, South Korea, since President Lee Jae Myung took power, regained this diplomatic credibility after the turmoil that got unleashed after the martial law declared by former President Yoon Suk-yeol in December. Being that said, what is interesting about the resilience of democracy in South Korea is that regardless of the coup d'etat, of the martial law, you could say this diplomatic credibility or the strength of democracy was highly threatened, but it never really felt that it fell apart. So what the administration of Lee Jae Myung did quickly was to, try to show the world and also locally that they had regained stability. And I think it's generalized opinion that at least that's one of their accomplishments. This doesn't mean that there's no challenges ahead, because if we're talking about diplomatic credibility, maybe South Korea is considered in general a reliable country in terms of trade or trade diplomacy and other sectors. But right now, there is a specific challenge in diplomatic terms with South Korea, which is the relationship with the United States, especially in the context of trade, that they haven't finalized certain negotiations, and that there seem to be discrepancies in many sectors, not only trade, also in defense and other things that are kind of being negotiated at the same time. But in general, after hearing the speech of President Lee Jae Myung, when he mentioned that Korea had completely returned to the international community and that they will act as a responsible global power that steadfastly upholds freedom, human rights, inclusiveness, and solidarity, it was a strong signal of saying the time of this impasse or stagnation provoked by the martial law and the consequences of it has ended, and we're right now ready to go back to interactions, of high-profile interactions that, of course, were stopped at the time. Just a quick note, maybe some people don't remember this, but in that process, there was the prime minister got to take power. Then we have different ministers, all down until like the fourth level. I think the last, if I'm not mistaken, or one before last, was the Minister of Education, who was acting as a president at the end of this process. So yeah, what is mostly interpreted by this is that Lee Jae Myung wants to send this message through his speech at the National Assembly.
Right, quite a bit of political turmoil here in South Korea before the election in June, of course. Camille, has President Lee Jae Myung's keynote speech at the UN General Assembly served to perhaps effectively relay his pragmatic diplomatic initiative to his global counterparts, do you think?
Well, actually, he didn't explicitly lay out his concept of pragmatic diplomacy, but he did send a clear message through his speech. He said, I quote, "The international community must gather its wisdom in a pragmatic solution when it comes to nuclear disarmament." That means he seems to be encouraging global leaders to adopt the same pragmatic approach that he himself advocates in addressing major challenges. He also showed that this pragmatism applies even to a country with which South Korea is still technically at war, by recognizing the North Korean regime, saying that he respects it and that he will not try to absorb it in any way. Lee Jae Myung is signaling a pragmatic approach to inter-Korean relation. And his call to reduce military tensions and restore inter-Korean trust illustrate the same philosophy he hopes to apply more broadly, whether in diplomatic relations with China or Japan, or the wider international community.
Right. I'd like to expand a bit on what Camille has just said. President Lee Jae Myung spent quite a portion of his speech on inter-Korean ties. Could you walk us through his remarks?
Yes, President Lee Jae Myung basically mentioned many of the policies or visions that his administration had been having towards North Korean security in the region. But the novelty was he presented a new initiative that he called END, as END. That means that what they will try to do is start with exchanges, inter-Korean exchanges, then normalize the relations, and then achieve denuclearization. While this doesn't really, or maybe it's yet to be seen the details of this, it would say it englobes other parts that, for example, he has mentioned, like gradually achieving denuclearization. His administration has been promoting this process of first freezing the nuclear program of Pyongyang, then reducing the nuclear weapons, and ultimately dismantling 100%. So what we would say is that, or the positive part that some pundits are seeing is that at least Lee Jae Myung, through the speech, managed to make it easy, or to put a clear framework, a clear word of what this initiative will mean, like almost like a recipe. So that sometimes is good in terms of communications. In terms of substance, well, many things are remain to be seen. There's so many challenges in this part. Recently, for example, the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, made this big statement that he remembered he had a good relationship with US President Donald Trump, saying that he doesn't see a reason why not to talk to US with the condition that denuclearization was not put on the table, but he's still shutting the door to South Korea, and it has been the message for a very long time already, since the past administration. And so even though President Lee Jae Myung has been promoting this, he still needs to, or I don't know, maybe there's something they're doing that we don't know, but we the public, we need to see a clear signal that Pyongyang is responding to this, how to say, like a pacts of reconciliation or acts of reconciliation, of inter-Korean reconciliation. Also, Another thing is that, well, maybe we'll talk a little bit more ahead, but North Korea will send their vice foreign minister, and some people are saying that that might be a signal that they are open to talk again to the world. This hasn't happened in 7 years, but I will detail it further later.
Okay, we'll touch upon that later. But you mentioned US President Donald Trump. He also took to the podium on Tuesday. Ruy, what was the gist of his message?
Right. Well, as always, with President Donald Trump, there is controversy or there is strong words. Camille already mentioned some of the things that he said, for example, when he talked about immigration, that he's saying that open borders are destroying countries or doing this irresponsibly. He criticized the UN by saying they offer empty words, kind of saying or showing a skepticism to multilateralism, among other things like putting himself more aggressive, let's say, in the language, but also, well, in a novelty, in a secondary topic, not exactly the question, but some comments about Russia and that are also relevant. But comparing, or what people in Korea are seeing is that there are some kind of discrepancies between what President Trump said and what President Lee Jae Myung said in terms of immigration or climate change. Clearly, President Trump is not happy about it or how things are being done in that sense, while Lee did mention that the UN, when they get together in unity, they can achieve things, and he also touched about the importance of fighting climate change, and also didn't criticize like policies on open immigration. And this topic specifically is quite interesting because, well, we are weeks maybe after the massive raid that happened in the US, in the Georgia plant of Hyundai and LG, where more than 300 South Korean workers were detained. So the rhetoric used, let's say, by the two leaders is different or it contradicts. But, well, at the same time, it's not like President Trump explicitly said something against South Korea, and not even much relevant comments related to the security of Korean peninsula. So yeah, we would say that Trump in the speech used strong words, criticized the UN, criticized even teleprompter and some automatic stare, some a little bit.
Right, I understand the escalator and the teleprompter were not working.
Yeah, they were not working. But in the aftermath, he did align with many things that UN is promoting. For example, he aligned with Ukraine with some posts in his social media. And he even talked positively of the UN like in the aftermath. But in the speech was a little bit of mixed feelings in that regard.
Right. In a press availability session after his talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he did speak about the need for Ukraine to regain some of its territory taken by Russia. But back to the situation here on the Korean Peninsula. Camille, what has been shared within the foreign media about the potential response from North Korea with regard to the recent comments made by President Lee Jae Myung at the UN General Assembly?
So today, South Korea wants dialogue, wants to end this circle of hatred. Trump wants the end of the conflict, also for personal reasons. Everybody knows that he's being very interested in the Nobel Peace Prize. He already claimed multiple times that he deserves it. Now, if North Korean leader Kim Jong-un can put an end to some international bans, he would. But he has one very crucial condition, as Ruy said earlier, which is keeping the country's military capabilities. The regime made it clear last Monday through the national news agency, KCNA. So that means no denuclearization. And if the United States accepts, then maybe North Korea seems willing to have talks with President Trump. Kim Jong-un even said that he personally has good memories of US President Donald Trump after months of silence regarding the American leader. But despite Lee Jae Myung's efforts to be less threatening towards North Korea, they also said that they do not have a reason to sit down and engage in negotiations with South Korea.
Right.
So,
Ruy, you mentioned earlier North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sung-kyung. He'll be addressing the UN General Assembly next Monday. Do tell us a bit more about the significance of this event, upcoming event that is, and what do you suppose might his message include?
Yes, so the significance of the visit is that it's the highest profile participation of North Korea in the General Assembly in 7 years, except from the ambassador that North Korea has to the UN. The move has been interpreted as Pyongyang trying to raise their diplomatic visibility and heighten attention of inter-Korean dynamics and US policy. Again, this is all interpretations. With Pyongyang, in general, it's they would give you, let's say, messages little by little. And what I mean with this is, for them might be enough to send the signal, but the content of the message, what is expected is that it could be very similar to what they have been already saying through their state media and other means. It is expected that in previous interventions, he talks about deterrence and the justification of deterrence because they're threatened by other powers. He might reject, let's say, if he mentions the specific name of this new END initiative of Lee Jae Myung, but at least it's expected that he will reject the idea of putting denuclearization in the negotiation table, and he will call for lifting sanctions and describe the hostile U.S. policies that Kim Jong also recently said. Well, that is what is expected. Still, as I mentioned, with Pyongyang, one has to be very careful in analyzing the way they communicate their messages. For example, not so long ago, the sister of Kim Jong-un made also a statement, very harsh, very critical, very, let's say,
it was a belligerent
high-tone,
speech.
belligerent speech against South Korea, but she used the name of the President Lee and of many of people of their cabinet. And I was talking, this is not agreed by all experts, but one of them told me that even though it was a harsh message, it could be a little signal that they are saying, we are paying attention, because in the previous messages, in the previous administration, you didn't see that detailed type of messages. So let's see what we can read, let's see what we can interpret by the by the intervention of this Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sung-kyung. And then, well, maybe later we will talk about how it goes, but more or less that is what is expected.
Right. Then in the meantime, Camille, what were your biggest takeaways from President Lee Jae Myung's speech at the UN General Assembly?
First, by addressing both the audience and global leaders, Lee Jae Myung placed strong emphasis on peace, as you said. He underlined that Korea has a role to play in promoting global peace. But in order to do so, peace must be achieved on the Korean peninsula. In other words, Lee Jae Myung seems to recognize that building a better place, a better world, more peaceful world begins with ensuring peace with Korea's closest neighbors, South Korea's closest neighbors. Second, he did touch on Ukraine and also mentioned the Middle East without explicitly referring to Gaza before returning to themes of peace, democracy, and cooperation. Now, as you know, I will talk about France because I know France, but French President Emmanuel Macron recently joined other countries in recognizing the state of Palestine. For much of the French media and opinion, while this recognition is very important, they also point out that it came very late. It has been criticism that France should have taken this step earlier. And the French newspaper Le Monde recently published an article asking why Korea and Japan have not recognized Palestine, even though South Korea's foreign minister recently said that a two-state solution is the only way to resolve the Israeli-Palestine conflict and achieve lasting peace. So I would say that while words matter, observers are watching also actions very closely as well.
Right, because quite a number of pundits say actions speak louder than words, right? Ruy, President Lee Jae Myung is also poised to preside over the UN Security Council open debate on artificial intelligence and global peace. Now, this is the first time for a South Korean leader to chair such an open debate. How do the optics, if you will, of this particular opportunity look to serve South Korea, do you think?
Yes, the general interpretations is that President Lee Jae Myung will take this opportunity to boost Seoul's diplomatic profile in line of many things that we have been saying. And since it's the debut of South Korea in this kind of debate of the Security Council, and now that they have this upgraded role as a non-permanent member that is holding right now the presidency of the Security Council, he will play it as a opportunity to back, we could even say, some of the things he said even in his speech in the General Assembly. One of the things he will focus a lot is in his vision of artificial intelligence as a tool that, instead of dividing humanity or deepening inequality, it could serve humanity and for the better. He has linked even previously, this part of the AI it has been a focus of his administration. Even before this debate, he has linked it to achieving peace, security, and warning against what they call invisible enemies when it's talking about cyber attacks and the misuse of technology, which is a big issue right now, especially in South Korea, that we have I think the last 2 weeks, many news related to cyber attacks or hacking and those sort of things. And of course, with the power of these cyber attacks by Russia or China, it could be a way that he could be saying we can actually improve security through these tools. Now, of course, you don't want to mention that since they're there too. And the strategic optics for Korea, he could strengthen his position to give this kind of diplomatic credibility towards all the members of the UN and the international community, and present this new Korea, as he has been calling it, and also as to invite everyone to the coming forum or summit of APEC in October in South Korea. It will be a good way to present this image of the country and encourage everybody to attend.
Right, and that open debate at the UN Security Council will take place on Wednesday, local time in New York, of course. Right, and Ruy, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
And Camille, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, that brings us to the end of this edition of Press Perspective. We'll return with more panel discussion on the diplomatic gatherings at the UN tomorrow. Join us then.